And let's come to our final session of this wonderful symposium. As you can see in the program, we want to first hear some key messages resulting from the working groups that just took place. And I will then invite our panelists here to react and to conclude what they have heard and what the lessons are that we take with us all for the next future. We have from the left to the right Manfred Zentner from the Pool of European Researchers. We have Irda Bergwart from the European Youth Forum. We have Karin Lopata-Leubel from the European Commission. Antje Rothemund from the Council of Europe. Marine Manusharian from the Advisory Council and the steering group of the event, and also Jan van Hey representing the CDG and the Youth Working Party. So these are two circles, for those who don't know that, who represent the ministries on the one hand side in the Council of Europe, on the other side in the European Union. So, but first, before we start, then that this panel gets the floor, I would invite the speakers for these four working groups to shortly present a few key recommendations or conclusions. You will certainly not have the time to summarize all your discussions. I heard that there were quite some extensive recommendations, a huge number. We will take them into account when it comes to the final report and the summary of conclusions there. But probably some key issues that you want to raise, I would say each rapporteur would have around 2-3 minutes or so. Please keep it short. So who would be the first? Should I just start in the order of the way we organize the communication?
Okay, so I'm hoping, can you hear me? I don't think it's working. Is it? Okay. So we had an extensive debate and a discussion about what it is that we are taking away from the symposium regarding digital communication and digital tools of facilitating youth participation. And we've concluded in general that online tools and offline tools need to be mixed together in order to have a coherent engagement and participation from youth. This is sort of general, and I think this is something that we have been discussing throughout the symposium, but we have reached a conclusion that digital tools are actually shaping the way digital communication in general and engagement is happening, and that's why we have started to look at the specifics of the digital environment and the way it is changing how youth is communicating and engaging in their communities or with other communities. We have heard throughout the symposium about a lot of data available out there and surveys and a lot of useful information about how to shape the programs and how to better engage youth. But we reached the conclusion that there might be an opportunity to connect all this data that's available out there with those in here. So we need to have a better understanding of how we can reach this data and how we can translate it and understand it better. So one of our proposals would be to create some sort of community for networking and sharing best practice examples and experiences from other organizations who are using exclusively digital tools in their youth engagement, so that we can learn from their experiences and try to implement what they do in our projects as well. The symposium is a good start, so we would like to continue this sort of open space for discussion and debates into further projects similar to this one. Also, one other suggestion from a policy point of view, and this is something that is connecting back to the EU digital agenda is there's a need to look at less connected, less disadvantaged groups or regions of the countries that we are working in, because there may be times where youth is not connected to the internet just because there's not, if there isn't a technologically possible, or because there are economic obstacles in the way. So one option and one suggestion would be to come up with programs to offer in these communities free Wi-Fi, for instance, or create some sort of open spaces for accessing the internet. And also, of course, this will lead into the education part, which is the next workshop, about how to actually equip this youth with the skills necessary to use the internet and to use digital tools. But these would be our two main suggestions. Continue and develop a network at a EU level or international level of facilitating access to organizations who are doing a lot of digital engagement and to share best practices and experiences, but also from a policy point of view to make up projects and initiatives to facilitate access to internet, but also education and skills to use this internet for information gathering, but also for content creation. So this would be all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. As you can see, quite comprehensive recommendations or conclusions. I guess if we continue now with the second group, education, it will be the same. So who would report from this group, education? You have still to, oh no, okay, good.
It's more than one person. We work as a team.
Okay, great, great, great.
We had three groups in our group, so we've been working in a group of researchers, youth workers, and then the youth policymakers. And I would represent the researchers, then the youth workers, and the policymakers just sitting right here. And the thing that we discussed, so that's what is needed, or our key messages, is that there's a need to describe the world in a new way, because it's a new world where there is not anymore offline-online reality, but this is online-offline constantly really interlinked together. And there is a need to new wording, to new theories and new terminologies which are connected with this. And there is as well big change which comes out of it if it comes to learning and teaching. So the old teaching as well is not kind of valid anymore, and there are many areas where the young people and kids even are more competent than the adults. So there is as well changes in that sense, that there is overlapping there. And there are needs for new research, which is then touching, for example, the impact on this new digital learning. So if it's the same learning which happens offline, so to say, there were these discussions that how to cope with students which are getting the certificate, or they are learning through from online universities, if it's the same learning what happened in the offline universities. And as well the big need to understand young people, so who they are, what they need, how they learn. And there is a need which really means to be with them, to have this participatory approach and ethnographic works, not just send next questionnaire and kind of, lack of contact approach. And then we need new instruments, because there need to new instruments for new educational tools for the digital and for participation, new pedagogy to connect these different worlds, and a lot of, as well, new trainings for teachers who have to as well be able to connect this modern and this kind of more digital youngsters who are much more advanced in this so-called digital literacy. We discussed the term as well, that we shouldn't use this word literacy because it means something different in the traditional world, and it's more than just set of competencies, but so far it's used, that's why I use it as well right now. But this training for teachers is very important. And one last thing, it's very important to mention, I believe so, there is as well a need to be aware that researchers have a big responsibility, because today we are living in this evidence-based policy, so you are producing actually evidence which is having then very as well big political outcomes. So to be aware that it sometimes could be instrumental, so it's not just for science, and that's good to be aware of it. Thank you.
And here's the easy job for me to speak on behalf of the youth workers. Well, for us, youth workers and youth work in general has actually one of the most important roles in education about digital participation and using digital tools. So one thing for us would be to recognize the youth workers as the main connectors and mediators between the different stakeholders and the young people, because they have the access to all tools, and they can also ensure the use of a balanced way of both traditional tools and the more new, modern and online tools, of course. But we also accept that youth workers and educators in general should be trained as well. And maybe they can still learn from the young people. And for that point, maybe even the youth centers can be used to create that hub and that space of sharing experiences between the youth workers, policymakers, and young people, together with researchers. Also, we need a better understanding of what digital participation is, and youth workers are there to contribute to that with their expertise and long life experience as well. And I think more or less that would be it. The most important thing is to actually be recognized and to include the youth workers as well as youth work through the different policies as well. So we don't have only the digital agenda, but we also include it in the youth participation and other youth sectorial policies. I think that would be it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I will base a little bit on what my colleague said. And we also talked about the need for training and education for youth workers and school teachers. But we also realized that it's important to understand the principles of the development and implementation of real youth policy on a national levels, because sometimes we come up with recommendations without understanding how it really functions. So before going with advices and recommendations, it's important to understand how it works. Cross-sectoral approach is very important, especially when it comes to e-participation and promotion of digital participation. And this approach should be promoted through different forms of education and also through different other forms of support and promotion. It's important not to overestimate the meaning of digital technologies to promote and support youth participation, and pay more attention to the holistic education that focuses more on values relevant for youth participation. In other words, technologies are still technologies, but if there are no values behind it, if there are no emotions and feelings, then they will just stay. So it's useless to teach technology and forget about something which actually makes the core thing, the core meaning of youth participation. And another very interesting discussion that we had related to youth policy was about need of switch from patronizing and protecting of young people through the youth policy to actually preparing them for real life. Because what actually happens that sometimes we enable young people ourselves through our youth policies and youth work. So it's important also to have this probably switched in the direction of preparing them for what they will actually face in their reality.
Thank you. And now I see already the rapporteur of Group 3, Working Life.
Yes, I was the most pink in the group, so they appointed me. Yes, short remark, I think, the things in youth work will become a bit more, how to say, relevant to reality when we will stop playing ukuleles or play on iPads and stop reading from small papers and we'll start reading from digital devices. At least for kids it looks a bit more relevant. Okay, a few points. We talked about economical aspect of digital participation, and we had a lot of discussions because maybe we thought that it was a bit lacking during the symposium, the economical aspect. So one thing what we see needs to be improved in this regard, also improve the whole policy making process. How to involve more stakeholders, more groups, how to make policy making more inclusive, how to create this loop of policy making so that we stop only producing policy, but we also start assessing the policy. We also saw that we often report about stuff, but we don't assess the impact of policy making and also different policies. We also kind of concluded that policy making process and policies try to preserve the current modus operandi by definition, because we know how it works, we want to prevent it, rather than constantly improvise and look for new settings where policies could work better. And that's why we call for stronger emphasis on social innovations in different fields, but also in policy making. Also, we should be more open that some problems cannot be solved at an individual level. So if you fail at getting a job, maybe it's not only your problem, maybe there are no jobs. You can be super employable, super nice, but there are no jobs, and that could be a problem. Also, youth policy should reconsider its, how to say, its realm. Because very often, even though we consider youth policy as horizontal policy, but still it's locked down in quite narrow area. And since all youth policy measures in a way support building youth autonomy, we see that building economical autonomy sometimes is lacking. Either we don't know how to do it, or we cannot reach out to those players or those ministries which are actually supporting building youth autonomy, economical economy. We see that also financial literacy is very often missing, and we should start doing it. Financial literacy, digital literacy, economical literacy, start teaching it as soon as possible. Also, we should also show youngsters that getting a job is not the only way how you can earn your living. To show them how value is created, what are the different ways of creating value, and also it will empower, we believe, young people to see that there are different ways how they can give something to society and how it can be monetized. It's another question, of course. Cross-sectoral cooperation needs no further explanations. Also, we thought that we can say on behalf of our group, let youngsters play. Let them play. It's okay to play. We all played, okay, we played offline. Now they play online and it's perfectly fine. But we need to find a way how to bridge their success online, their success in games, to their success in the real world. Also, we said that we don't want to attack policymakers or education, but sometimes the current set, what we teach them and how we teach them and how we assess them, can somehow prevent them from gaining skills which will be needed in 10 to 15 years. Because we all know that most probably 40% of jobs in 20 years will be those which don't exist now. So how to give skills which are needed now, but also allow them to gain skills which will be needed for them in the future, and most of these skills they gain from cooperation, from communication, from playing games. We also said that digital in participation is participation. We don't need to try to bridge digital participation to what we call real participation. We just have to also go out and see where they participate, what they do, really using a youth work approach. Don't bring them to where we are, but go out and work with them. And we also see in the current situation that the resources allocated for young people for youth work are channeled or taken away from certain areas of working with youngsters to solving economical problems, for example, youth guarantee, and we think it's a wrong approach because youth work and youth policy should be comprehensive and it should tap in different fields, and we cannot solve only economical problems on the account of other aspects. And another thing, we see that society and media could play a bigger role in the economical upbringing of children, because often we see that taking risk is not necessarily supported, playing games is not supported, starting your own business is not necessarily supported. I'm talking now from Lithuanian perspective, and we don't have a right to fail in a way. So also there are different ways how youth work, can create safe environments to try out and to fail, and to try out again and fail even better. So with this remark, I will finish.
Thank you very much. So, then the report of the last working group that was focusing on the issue of democracy and participation.
Okay, I try to do it very shortly. First, the group who tackled the researchers said that we need a cross-sectoral dialogue, like we started today, but on a constant way with youth workers, with policymakers and researchers on this subject. Then the other thing is, which was not in the focus of this symposium, how marginalized groups of young people use the internet for their empowerment. So this is something we have to focus on in the future. For example, refugees. And the third aspect I want to stress out here is not only look when you analyze in the research participation online, you also have to take into account visual materials or political art, so everything which is not only text. So these are the things on the research side. On the policy side, just to make it short, we came up with that youth participation is part of good governance in the 21st century. And as a strategy, it could be good to look at the open government strategies which are already existing on the European or national levels, and also on the digital agendas on the various levels, and to bring in, and this is something very concrete policymakers from the youth field can do, bring in the focus of youth and the specific needs of youth participation in there, because from our side, or our view is that this is missing in these overall strategies. And if we take this seriously, there's a need of resources and of course specific support for young people, and their youth work can play a role. Youth work should more and more take into account civic education and especially participation methods and skills. So that means youth work can be the bridge or the link between policy-making, decision-making, and young people. So they can open the dialogue and they can bring in the skills and empower young people to take part. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now I invite our panel to react to your conclusions. Of course, it will not be possible to give an answer or reaction to all these different ideas and recommendations, but probably some key issues that you picked up. I would like to start with what we have heard last, the whole issue of youth work and the relevance of youth work, youth NGOs and the civil society sector. And I would like then first to invite Marine to react as a representative of young people also engaged in youth NGOs, and then followed by Ida probably, and then we continue on our panel. Please.
I don't want to consider this as a punishment for young people to go first.
Short statement.
Excuse me, do we react, or we already have also the closing remarks as well from our side? Do we just react to the presentations, or we also continue with the closing remarks of the whole?
No, I would first like to have a short reaction to,
okay,
and probably to pick up what was for you most relevant, and
of
then
course
we would have a final conclusion session.
Great. Well, looking at also working with the last presentation group, it was very interesting to see that in general, we all have kind of a common understanding of what we need. But there is a lack of probably data or concrete analysis for the youth workers to work with. And I was actually looking into the presentations, and during the work was thinking that there is an interesting link between the outcomes of the second Youth Work Convention, actually, to understand their role as well, and why not the role in the digital participation as such. And it's great that we also have this opportunity to look into the fact that we have all the stakeholders here in the room. And from the kind of part of a youth worker perspective and the perspective of a policymaker, I would say that it's great that we all kind of put ourselves in the shoes of others, because we didn't split the groups in terms of only policymakers talk about it, or only youth workers talk about it, or only the researchers talk about it, but in fact trying to look through the eyes of the researchers, youth workers, and policymakers. So it was an interesting exercise, and I think the outcomes were a common ground, and it is a very good ground to continue building on, and asking and creating a demand probably from the institution side, to the researchers and policymakers as well, to kind of bring in the needed data, the needed analysis, because we do have our own image of what is happening in the digitalized world with young people, but we still lack of a general picture. There's parts of puzzle missing, but we all are willing, at least the goodwill is out there, and I think that is a very good start already. Thank you.
Thank you. Ida, would you also comment on what you heard now as conclusions?
Yes, so just the comment and then afterwards the closing remarks. Okay, in the whole right now? Or?
No, I think first
the
I would like to give first all of you the floor as a reaction to the results of the working groups, and then the conclusion.
I think it's very interesting what we have heard, that especially what has been mentioned a lot of the times, that we need to connect the online and the offline tools, that we should not create separate structures, platforms for youth participations, but we need to look at these ones in connections, and we need to look at the already existing structures and connect these ones. And also that many of you mentioned that a lot of the good tools are already there. They just need to be implemented. And we need the serious end-to-end involvement of young people, and it needs to be legally binding as well. And this is a clear follow-up after this conference, and I think this will be my first impressions and reactions on this.
Thank you. Jan, what do you say from a policy perspective?
First of all, I'd like to thank the partnership and the whole steering committee for the preparation. For me, it was very interesting, a very rich input and discussions. One element that I will think further on is e-participation with, from, and by young people can help us to develop or to shape better governance, because that is my major concern from the policymakers' perspective. Even we are not belonging to the decision makers, but the major concern is today in that digitalized world, how we can strengthen democracy. That was my first question also in the opening session, and that is my major concern. And young people, you can help us to feed us for a better governance, and it's the whole digitalization. It's a dangerous tool also. I see how it helps ES to spread their messages. And that is not what I'm fighting for as a Democrat. So we stand for values, so therefore education very early on using that is important. But for me, it's just a beginning to think about the whole issue.
Okay, thank you. Manfred. what did you as a researcher now, what do you take with you when you go home as a message from the final workshop results?
Yeah, the workshops seem to be quite interesting, and the one in which I was very intensive, and that's the learning for me is, as it was mentioned already, this division between a digital and a real world, virtuality against reality. This is questionable, and we have to be very sure in our research approaches to not fall into that trap, to make this division between something virtual and something only online, and it does not reflect in the offline reality. Yeah? That's one of the main issues, and it also became clear for me that there is obviously a lack of data, a lack of information for the policymakers as well as for the practitioners, and it's the need of an ongoing dialogue in the magic triangle, and yeah, okay, we know that, but it's going also on this topic, so it's not that new topics that pop up somewhere just come up, even if we have already this culture of an ongoing discourse. Yeah, suddenly, with a new topic, we are still back to the roots and are asked to provide data. For us, it's also a learning, for me, it was a learning that we have to be more concise with our methodology and with our terminology when we are talking about things like literacy, things like participation. We have to be quite clear what we mean about it, and it needs new forms of finding the approach to the data sources, which are the young people, that we understand the same thing that the young people do understand about that. So it asks for participatory research, it asks for an engagement into a participatory culture and get the research into that. And not to forget that there are existing and new developed inequalities that has to be researched and analyzed and given, maybe developed tools together with the practitioners and with the policymakers to tackle these inequalities and work on that. That would be for me now.
Okay, thank you. Then I probably, when it comes to European institutions, I start with the European Commission, if you don't mind, Karin.
Thank you, Hanyo. Yeah. I do not mind. Actually, I would like to start with what Manfred just said, and you referred to inequalities. Now, when it comes to the use of digital means, there are clearly inequalities, and they were clearly shown in the presentation that we heard this morning. And this is why, from all your really interesting, well thought through, and prepared in hard work messages, I would like to focus on one particular aspect, which is in line with the EU Youth Report 2015, which was presented by the European Commission yesterday. And for those who had already the chance, despite you were completely absorbed here in this conference, to take a look, you will have seen that the focus is on young people with fewer opportunities. And the other aspect is the outreach to young people, and especially to this group. Now this can be done through different means and tools, but definitely also through on and offline tools. So how to enhance the digital competency or capacity of young people with few opportunities, with the aim to give all young people who wish to do so the possibility to take an active part in our society. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, finally, Antje.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for this working group reports, and I am extremely relieved because I was not here yesterday, and I was really afraid that I won't understand a word of your recommendations with this digitalized world. But I understood most of it, or nearly all of it, and I'm really happy to hear that the recommendations actually are things that we can also follow in our work offline. Youth participation was stressed very, very much, and I'd like to share really some good news with you, and that is that youth participation, in my perception, has never been as high up on the policy agenda as it is at the moment. Sometimes I even feel we are a little bit the victims of our success of promoting youth participation and co-decision making, because we cannot co-decision make all the time and everywhere. Also, there are a lot of requests being brought towards us in the youth sector of the Council of Europe, and also to people working on national and local level. And why is that is something that we surely cannot answer today, but we could analyze. Is it out of desperation and the lack of ideas and answers that policymakers have? Or is it because there is really already a raised awareness that young people's contribution in shaping policies is part of good governance, like the last working group reported? And I think it's probably a little bit of both. But there is, in fact, quite a lot of questions put to us now that the policy level cannot answer. And one of the questions is really how to bring online and offline together, that it's one world and not considered as two different worlds. And I feel many of your reports have brought this up quite clearly. I'd also like to say that the symposium is on the main portal of the Council of Europe front page this morning, coe.int. And it is very rare that the youth news make it to the front page of the portal. And I find this very interesting because it's obviously for the presence of the VIPs on Monday, but it also about the subject, because that is a subject which is really extremely intriguing, and where again the adult world expects the youth world to come up with answers. And I believe some of the answers, or at least some more questions, have been produced during these 3 days. And in the final statement that I can say, I will also say a little bit how in the Council of Europe we would like to follow up to the recommendations. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we should come now to this final concluding session and invite each of the panelists here to commit him or herself to anything. So that means in the sense of what would be in your perspective a concrete follow-up to this symposium. What would you commit also to do personally or in your institutional capacity or so? I think I should start on the very right side with Mr. Van Hey.
Thank you.
I commit.
Thank you very much. I'm looking to my colleagues. I see Philip from the permanent representation of Luxembourg. I think in the next week we have Director General's meeting. I think we have to look in the agenda to echo back some of those findings, and also the fact that the partnership is working on that topic, because it's in the heart of our work today. So I'm looking forward for that. I'm also looking to my other colleague, Zenka from the Czech Republic. I see David from Armenia. I see George Orlando, my vice chair of the CDG also. I think we have to echo back that also to our colleagues of the CDG. And in line with what Antje also was saying, I think we have to reflect more, to think more in how to develop further e-participation with our focus, with the focus of young people, and how it can contribute for having a better understanding and knowledge about what is going on in the world, but also for helping us to shape and to develop a better democracy, because, and that is a point we have to reflect more, how we can share our power with other powers in that very complex system of democracy. So those are two concrete things I like to follow up, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jan. Probably we should continue with Marine, the partner, so to say, within this system of co-management. What is your answer there?
It's okay that not everybody will participate. It might be a controversial statement, but I think we should give ourselves a little bit of a break in terms of lowering the expectations from ourselves as well, in a way. Because when we put a very big high stake, we kind of feel ourselves less powerful in terms of changing. So maybe we can come down to the ground and understand that there is a lot of young people that either don't know or they don't realize, and our work is to grasp as much as of the young people that we can to make sure that the democracy works and that it helps us to make the world a better place. I commit. I am working with my colleagues from the CDJ in the Joint Council of the Council of Europe, and that's my platform as a policy-making participation on the level of the Council of Europe. And the co-management system, good or bad, it's actually a very great platform for us to shape the agenda of this institution and to help, why not, throughout Europe to change the lives of young people. And I commit to actually bring this up and the outcomes of this symposium at the next Joint Council meeting, my last one actually, but Jan is going to be there, so he, I'm sure, will commit to doing it as he was doing it all these years. To bring the idea and try to create a precedent so that for the next 2 years' term, my colleagues coming after me, the young people representing the youth of Europe or the networks of hardworking young people there, will try to put it in the, and create, why not, a Council of Europe agenda for young people and youth participation, and give it a priority. I'm sure there is a lot of things being done in the Council of Europe in terms of digital participation, the e-governance and internet security and safety, cyber security, but there is, of course, a lot of room for development. Yeah, I also actually want to thank very much the partnership for taking me on board from the Advisory Council. Actually, there is one person I specifically want to thank. It's Fanny Sherman, my colleague at the Advisory Council, just because she couldn't make it to the partnership meeting, because she's the dossier holder. I made it, and I was lucky to actually be part of the steering committee and work hard for this symposium to be a success. And also, I think it was a great start. It was really inspiring. It gave a lot of questions. I am going back with a lot of suitcase full of questions and possibilities to actually find new ideas and create synergies. I was asked in the last group what is going to be the follow-up, what is planned to be the follow-up for this symposium, and I said it's actually institutions will do their job, but it depends also from each and every one of us to actually commit to something, to the follow-up. And it doesn't have to be together with the partnership. It doesn't have to be together with the Council of Europe. It can be with your city municipality, anything that actually inspired you from this place. And there was one crazy idea, and I promised I'm going to say it in the big plenary, which was in 1 year time, you can put one tweet with the hashtag up there of what you actually did in terms of as a follow-up, 140 characters on Twitter with the hashtag. So I can take also the commitment to remind the partnership in a year time to actually send the email to remind people about this crazy idea, which I think it's not that crazy. It's just a show of commitment in a way. And I want to thank each and every one of you, and of course I want to thank my colleagues from both institutions for actually providing this space and being very committed to implementation. And I've seen very many dedicated people trying to actually find solutions and raise these questions, but we are the ones who actually committed to change this world, or at least to work with young people to get them on board. So I think if we keep on doing our good job well, it's going to be a great progress in a way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marine, also having invited all our participants to commit to anything and to come back to us in 1 year time. So that was, I think, an excellent idea. And now, Ida, from the perspective of the youth NGOs in Europe.
Yes. Young people are more politically engaged than ever. The problem is just that they don't participate in formal structures of democracy and they don't vote. Despite the increase in political interest and democratic education, young people still have the lack of confidence that they can influence the political system. They have low democratic self-confidence, which means that young people are increasingly not linked to representative democracy. Research shows that young people's lack of participation in elections has consequences for the future of the representative democracy. Because participation in elections is a norm which is founded in youth, if young people don't choose the ballot box, it's often a choice for life. Young people must be involved in existing structures of our democracies. And as mentioned many times here, we need to connect the online and the offline tools. I hear very often when I'm discussing this area with politicians and policymakers that they want to involve young people through these new, smart, innovative, fancy social media ways. And through informal dialogue, because that's what young people like. Let's get on Instagram, Facebook to see how many likes we can reach from young people. This is a very misunderstood consideration of young people, and it is not based on letting young people get access to the decision-making. Most of these new alternative initiatives have little or no effect and does not even have the support of young people themselves. Young people want to be taken serious, and they need to be a part of real decision-making. We can't let policymakers get away with involving us through informal Facebook chats and then forgetting us when the real decisions are being taken. We need to look at the good example of using digital tools for participation, because digital tools can indeed play an important role when we need to increase youth participation, both in elections and between. We have seen many good examples and projects during these days. But when we speak about new digital tools for participation, we need to figure out how young people can play a bigger role when real decisions are being taken, when policies are made, when budgets are being decided, and when projects are being implemented. There are being developed so many new good digital tools that makes the access to information and the policymakers easier for young people. We need to remove the barriers. We need to make processes more simple, transparent, accessible, not create new parallel structures where young people place with young people. We need to make voting processes easier. We need to make policymakers to engage in equal partnerships with young people on matters that influence them. And here, digital tools can indeed play a very important role. We need to adapt the representative democracy to the new tools. And as mentioned from one of the working groups, it is useless to teach technology without the morals and values. And here comes my commitment as a representative from the youth organizations. The youth organizations plays every day a major role when new generation learns how representative democracy works. In youth organizations, young people participate through representative structures. Youth organizations are the link between young people and politicians. It is therefore important that these new tools and ways of digital participation are developed and used together with the youth organizations. Digital tools can play an important role for youth organizations in order to have more impact and have more outreach to other groups and young people. But it's important that it is developed and used together with the already existing structures and the youth organization, which has the structures already there. That's my closing comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ida. And I think the European Youth Forum is a very good advocate for these expectations. So now, researcher, Manfred, what are the researchers doing now?
I'm good that you.
The gaps, the knowledge gaps.
You now formulated it in the way what are the researchers doing, and you're not asking anymore for a personal commitment of my part. That's very nice.
What a pity.
What a pity. But I will give a personal commitment on that, and for me it is really became clear again and obvious that we have to work more on an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approach to our research methodology, to our research ideas, being concise about the terms we are using, and especially make it clear that and be safe about it, that with these results can also be used, yeah, and they will be used, but we should be clear about that we have a responsibility here, and make it easy accessible, make data understandable. Maybe it is really a lot about presenting in a pink outfit instead of a black outfit. That would help people to understand it easier and use digital technology instead of papers. Maybe. Let's see if this helps something. For me, it's also clear that we have to focus more on this virtual reality and the real virtuality that not only young people but all of us are living in, and we have to be sure that we are really on the same side when we are still talking about a bridge, that we need to bridge a gap between virtuality and reality when we see it still. So be sure on which side we are and work on that. So that's from my side, from a personal side. I think it's needed for research to focus also on other forms of topics that really evolve with the development on the digital world, be it access to rights, be it data protection, be it online data, working with big data, new approaches in that. And that's not only my approach, but I guess here I asked my colleagues to commit to that and do something on that. And I want to end also with thanking the partnership for this great organization, this great event. It was really an interesting, enlightening, thought-provocative inputs, workshops, labs. I'm grateful that I was also involved already in the preparation group and could also get into that. I want to thank all the presenters. I want to thank also the General Rapporteur, we should talk a little bit about privacy settings of a diary. Yeah, that might be a bridge between online and offline. But I want to thank everybody. Go on. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Now, again, Karin?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, on behalf of the European Commission, I would like to officially close this conference. But before I do so, I think I owe you to share at least a little bit insights into the EU Youth Report 2015 that was presented by the Commission yesterday. As I already said, the focus clearly is on young people with fewer opportunities. And it's very important to counter marginalization, exclusion, but also radicalization. The Commission proposes a more systematic cooperation approach across the different policies, but also between the different actors in the youth field. Cross-sectoral links are particularly proposed in the field of sports and education, especially with a view to engaging and bringing on board young people with fewer opportunities. Also in the view, of course, of social inclusion, competence and employability. It is essential to give young people a political voice, and that's a sentence really taken from the youth report, and I think there's a very clear link to this conference and to what we have discussed the past 2 days. On the funding side, the Erasmus Plus program will commit greater funding to social inclusion, citizenship, and intercultural dialogue. That's more or less the content in a nutshell, but I would like to invite you to consult the documents yourself on the European Youth Portal. And just to give you an idea, these are really comprehensive documents. This time it's a wealth of information on the situation of young people, on how the member states implement the goals that they have set themselves in the context of youth policy cooperation at the European level. You will discover a draft joint report between the Commission and the Council. So the Council is yet to adopt this report. And there will be, yes, of course. And then there is a staff working document on the situation of young people in the 8 fields of action of the EU Youth Strategy, so education, training, employment, social inclusion, health and well-being, participation, volunteering, youth in the world, and culture and creativity. And there is another staff working document on the implementation of the cooperation framework in the youth field between the member states. So I would really like to invite you to consult these tools or this information online or offline, as you wish, because it's online. You can download it, or you can also order a hard copy of the report if you prefer. But coming back now to our conference, I should say that there is also a clear link to digital participation. It's expressly mentioned. So there will definitely be one focus on this kind of participation in the big chapter of participation, which has been a priority of the cooperation between the member states in the youth field from the beginning of EU youth policy, as I said, 14 years ago. And coming back to this conference, I think we spent 2 intensive days here discussing on and offline forms of participation of young people. We exchanged views, experiences, findings, and you came up with key messages, which we just heard and had the chance to comment a little bit. In fact, I would not like to comment further on these key messages because the European Commission has decided to consult those who are at the core of these efforts and to take these key messages out of the conference context and to give young people the opportunity to have a say on them. First of all, this is a possibility to involve many more young people than it's possible in this limited framework of a conference. Secondly, it's possible for young people to give their opinion online, or if they prefer, also offline, so to say. And we will invite them to comment on these messages, also in a sense of inviting them to tell us what of these messages are more important than others maybe in their daily lives, in what concerns them, because it's with the young people and for the young people that we all do this here together. Of course, we will keep you informed. You're also very welcome to follow and to vote yourself or to comment yourself. This will be probably put on the EU Youth Portal, I assume. And I think it's just another expression of how the Commission strives for taking youth participation further and further in the European policy making and to give young people really the opportunities to make their voices heard and to engage themselves at European level. And finally, let me thank you all for your hard work and your active contributions and active participations on and offline in this conference. And please keep it up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now, finally, I give the floor to Antje for her concluding remarks.
Yeah, if I commit to something now, I'm in real trouble because all my bosses are here. And I always say I have plenty of bosses. I have the governments as bosses. I have the young people as bosses represented by the youth organizations. I have the Secretary General of the Council of Europe as a boss. And I have all these other people that are just looking whether we do everything right, which are not formally bosses, but are still around and influence us, like the youth researchers, for example.
And the staff controlling you.
And, well, the staff, I mean, controls us as well, of course. So I think I can commit that the Council of Europe will definitely keep on co-management offline, because I believe that this is one of the core of our work, to promote as a youth policy measure and a youth policy value this co-decision making. You know that in our co-management there's at the moment also discussions on evaluating, assessing youth participation methodologies, and one of our work priority is innovative youth participation. And in this context, recommendations and results of this symposium will be very important, namely how the digital world can be used to bring innovation to youth participation structures, practice that we know already. I think I can also commit to use the recommendations as a horizontal dimension in our program implementation. We have in the Council of Europe a biannual program coming up, which has 3 main headlines, and I think for all the 3 headlines, what you did here is very important horizontally. First, youth participation and innovative forms of youth participation. I mentioned it already, but also the second one, access to rights. Also information is very important for young people in this respect. And thirdly, social inclusion of young people, and many of your comments, also the reports of the working group, showed also that digital means can help to socially include or also to socially exclude young people. And in this work priority, in this third one, also our No Hate Speech Movement campaign is placed. And there we have another challenge now, because it's actually the opposite. It's a campaign that has so far just been online, and we want to bring it more presently offline. So we are facing the other challenges we face in the youth participation priority. So we will need your help in that as well. And finally, I think one piece of work that we will do in future, and I think it's a big piece of work, will be the follow-up to the second European Youth Work Convention. You know that we are planning Committee of Ministers recommendation on promoting youth work and the role of youth work in promoting European values, democracy, human rights, and also rule of law, which is very important also online in the meantime. We heard a lot about cybercrime. And in this we will need your help also to do this in a modern way, in a sustainable way, and also in a way which is equally relevant for youth work carried out by the public authorities and youth work carried out by youth organizations and the civil society, because this will be our main challenge to bring this together, and all this, of course, within the magic triangle of youth work, youth policy, and youth research. I also would like to end by thanking all of you for your contributions in the past, in the future, and during these 3 days. Thank the steering group for a brilliant piece of work, because I know that you have been working very hard. What I always admire in the activities that are carried out by our partnership team is the excellent documentation of the events, a lot of materials available online also during the event. So the website is already very rich as it is now. So thanks also to the team of the partnership. And of course, thanks to the European Commission for continued good cooperation. And we have also in our program for 2016, probably Hanya will say that, a couple of activities already that will be a direct follow-up to this symposium. So thank you very much and have a safe trip home, all of you, and wherever you go in Europe or beyond.
Yeah, thank you, Antje. I don't want to extend this final session more than needed. I think you now are hungry and we should soon leave for lunch. But just for me, I want to mention two lessons that I learned during the last days. One is an issue that is anyhow follows me since my professional career, anyhow when I started as a youth worker many years ago, because we were always thinking about emancipatory approaches in our youth work activities and how we can support young people to more autonomy. And I think the whole issue that we learned here from consumer to producer, that is a very important issue that helps in this regard very much, without patronizing, but coming more to partnerships between those working with young people and young people themselves. A second lesson that I learned, that we are on a way to kind of blended approaches. That means blended approaches in learning, in teaching, but also in participation. That means that the diversity of different approaches altogether makes the difference, and that is for me something that we should also cultivate much more than we probably did in the past. The last thing that is still an open question for me, in how far the whole discussion about flat hierarchies and more democratic hierarchies in working life, in education life, and so will or can be a reality in the future in the digital world, because I think that is also highly relevant issue of democracies. So that is for me the two or three lessons that I take with me. Of course, we will continue as a partnership anyhow to discuss the issues here. Participation is in the core of our program, at least the framework program 2014-16. Therefore, that will be certainly a subject of next year. One of the ideas for next year is to focus on the question of social inclusion, equality, inequality. And here, I think this subject that we discussed here will be, of course, also of high relevance, because, as we could see, there is also the risk that a certain group of young people are excluded from certain developments. And I think that should be discussed more deeply also than we could do here. So this could be a concrete follow-up next year. I also... Yes, of course. We will publish the results of the discussions here. The idea is that we will publish in our series Perspectives on Youth a specific edition on the topic of youth participation in a digital world. We will certainly invite the participants here who provided inputs to provide papers, but also we will publish a call for papers for more people who could not participate here, and then we can see that we have a kind of good substance of discussion, a good basis for further reflection. So I thank you now also the steering group members who did really excellent work. I thank our facilitators and the rapporteur. All of you, thank you very much for all your engaged and committed work. All speakers, of course, and those who presented their practices in the labs. That was very, very helpful. And finally, also, of course, my colleagues in the partnership. In particular, I should mention Victoria, No, I mean, that is, and also Lali, who did for the online participation excellent work, and of course also Moza in Brussels and Lucy. So that is, I think, such an event would not happen without our supporters there. And the staff here in the European Youth Center, I should also mention. I mean, they also with such a huge event, also then linked to the Monday evening celebration. So that was certainly also a challenge here. So that they did really excellent work. Thank you very much.